methods and
Sorry about that.
that's
Keep going.
okay. Methods and procedures for their methods and procedures and goal setting criteria are in line with the Paris Agreement, which is doing carbon reduction and carbon management in concert with meeting the Paris Agreement goals of limiting a 1.5 degrees Celsius to, below 2 degrees Celsius raise in temperature over a period of time. So it's at a very high level, fundamentally, it's not just, a goal grabbing numbers out of the air that works for your organization. It's what's the science to get to those goals. And they're broken down by multiple verticals, many different verticals, even the bigs, transportation, et cetera. And it was put together by a group of people, the UN Global Compact, World Resources Institute, World Wildlife Federation. So it's a collective effort of global, I would say, climate protection activist groups. And like I said, they are their entire initiatives are based on trying to control and meet what was agreed to at the Paris Accord. For the context of the conversation that we're having today, I think an important thing for everyone to understand about science-based targets is they do not allow for the use of offsets in meeting your goals. So in the context of what we're talking about today, I've interpreted that in my practice and dealing with the marketplace is they basically rely on energy efficiency. And it says right in their kind of their charter that it's reducing emissions in your own operations and by your supply and value chain. So it's not relying on, somebody, planting a forest in Oregon. It's very action based for your portfolio. So for the sake of this conversation, that's the way I'm interpreting that. So what does that mean? It means energy efficiency retrofits as a pillar of a carbon reduction plan. So that's how I'm interpreting SBTs for, I think this crowd would probably, agree with that. And then we can unpack what that means and how they work. And so offsets are not allowed with SBTs. Renewables are, but offsets are not.
And just to clarify, when you say renewables are, that is both kind of owned assets as well as procurement?
Correct.
Can you dive a little bit deeper in there? What are you seeing? What's most common? What can if one is trying to put together a decarbonization plan, how do you think about renewables?
Well, I've seen a lot of organizations really rely on, obviously, everybody is doing, energy efficiency retrofits, maybe as part of capital projects, et cetera, which we'll probably get to a little bit more. But a lot of them do a lot of the REIT, commercial real estate decarbonization plans, goals, and how they're meeting their ESG goals is by buying RECs or by buying offsets and
Mm.
doing, on-site renewables, when they can. With that being the emphasis and energy efficiency, because I think initially it seemed that it was a less expensive, faster way of starting to bite into some of your your published goals.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know if anybody has any questions or we want to stop there for a little bit, but
We'll let people we will let people ask questions in the chat, and I'll read them on the fly. But
okay.
uh,
But
as yeah, go ahead.
well, what I was going to say is I think, in our conversations preparing for today, what I'm seeing and what I validated through some conversations with current and past clients is that um, the availability of RECs and renewables not on-site renewables, because that's completely in your control, but renewables, buying renewable energy through power procurement agreements is becoming more and more difficult because of supply and demand. And number two is significantly more expensive. Now, a lot of organizations are already enrolled in a multi-year procurement agreement where they've kind of locked in their prices. But when those start to roll over again, I heard that, RECs, especially in the New York City area, New York City hydro RECs are going to be in the kind of $20 per megawatt hour range, which is significantly higher than what it's been in the past. So the discussion that we've been having and that we want to unpack here a little bit more is like, okay, so now suddenly that strategy, which seemed easy, fast, and cheap in the beginning when you were trying to meet your goals, is now getting riskier. And in my personal opinion, will continue to do so because I'll give you an example. Large pharma organization, right, outside of this vertical market, but a very large national, international pharma has moved back their zero carbon goals from 2050 to 2025. So here is an organization that's gigantic, that has a lot of purchasing power because they haven't suffered, what the commercial real estate market suffered because of COVID and other market factors. They're going to enter the market and could annihilate the availability of RECs and even offsets. So that's the type of thing that I'm seeing that could put a lot of organizations at meeting their goals and achieving their goals and being successful at risk, because they have, they don't really they haven't really been giving the infrastructure and energy efficiency projects the consideration that they deserve. They've always been there, but I think they're going to become more important as time goes on in the relatively near future.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think for this group, a good analogy is renting versus owning, right? If you're paying RECs, you're kind of burning cash for somewhere to live. If you own those assets, my key takeaway is that that's preferable if you can make the financing work and if you can make the numbers work. Do you want to touch briefly? I know that science-based targets are an integral part, not the whole thing, but people talk about the alphabet soup of ESG reporting,
right,
frameworks and requirements. Without going down the rabbit hole, can you help get us up to speed on, like, if you're in commercial real estate or you run real estate for a large corporation, what are the frameworks that you should pay attention to off the bat?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think the most prevalent for the commercial real estate group is GRESB. I think would be safe to say, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. CDP and CRI are right there also. But I think from personal experience in helping a commercial real estate REIT a few years ago, it's not super prominent in New York, but it was my sole responsibility as a consultant to drive the E portion of their ESG submission to GRESB. And I know for a fact that cleaning their data, number one, and really having clean data and deciding whether to do market-based analysis or location-based analysis for their carbon content of the energy they use was a pretty big deal. But GRESB specifically, that I know for a fact, does award a certain amount of benefit for having science-based targets. And you don't have to sign up with the SBTI, which is actually, my opinion, is very onerous, very difficult to do. It's complicated and expensive, but if you can show that you have science-based targets that are part of your overall corporate goals, that are aligned with the structure and purpose of SBTs without actually being part of SBT, that you've got some weight in your GRESB score. And I think I think CDP is the same, but I haven't validated CRI.
Cool. Translation for everyone, there's an organization called SBTI that came up with science-based targets. You can validate your science-based targets with them. You don't necessarily have to get the credit for GRESB and CDP.
You do have to demonstrate that they're in line with their strategies and approaches, which is number one, primarily no offsets. So it's based on renewables procurement strategy and energy efficiency reductions over time, absolute in your organization.
And I think the thorniest aspect of all of this is the question of scope 3 emissions. So you mentioned the challenges with data cleansing, data acquisition. I think you're referring mostly, this is scope 1 and 2, right? You're referring to just getting utility bill data in a central repository that can be reported out on and can be kind of automated from a disclosure perspective. But correct me if I'm wrong, science-based targets say that if scope 3 emissions are a substantial part of your overall carbon footprint, they must be included as well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So for real estate, that has huge implications. So a couple anecdotes from Enertiv's side. On the in addition to being a technology provider that serves landlords, part of which is a sub-metering solution. So if there's a process in place where the landlord gets one big utility bill and they have to divvy it up amongst their tenants, they can use Enertiv's software to streamline that process. We also have occupier clients, and they're coming to us and saying, hey, we lease space in dozens of different places, and we get all these different sub-meter bills from all these different providers. The bills are unbelievably opaque. They're impossible to, they go through our accounting team, so they don't want to be bothered with giving us the data that we need. B, when we get it, it's usually like a photocopy, and the bills themselves are impossibly opaque. And so, we're happy to help them. We'll do our kind of digitization process, whatever form that takes. But it's really eye-opening. Like, so much attention has gone into tenant engagement, right? That was a hot topic in prop tech and commercial real estate technology for a few years there. And meanwhile, your tenants who are trying to achieve the same objective that we're talking about here, they're trying to report on their utility consumption, their scope 2 emissions are your scope 3, right? It's the same data set. Right. And we're not, many organizations are not providing their tenants with an easy, streamlined, and usable approach to achieving their same goals. Now, not all portfolios or property types have this sub-metering process, right? There are, triple net leased portfolios where the tenants are directly metered by the utility. They pay their own bills. The landlord has no idea what's going on there or any involvement there. If you are aiming to set, science-based targets that have scope 3 emissions included, it's worth taking another look, if you haven't already, at shadow metering, right? It is not overly complicated or overly expensive to deploy basically a redundant meter, capture that data that you need for reporting purposes. And then there's a lot of cool things that you can do with that. for example, value add services to the tenants. You can provide them not only with real-time visibility into what they're consuming, but also insights. You can say like, hey, according to or you don't have to do it. The software will do, hey, you're not shutting down your operations on the weekend when nobody's there, for example. So these are kind of value add things that can be applied to tenants, and it's directly applicable to this conversation because scope 3 is this like very NAREIT wrote to the SEC and they said, please don't have us include scope 3 emissions. We just don't have access to them, and it's not necessarily true. I think it's something that needs to be reevaluated.
It's something, and obviously in my experience too is like GRESB, all the ESG platforms have been focused on scope 1 and 2 because
Sure.
they're getting their process and getting organizations and pulling organizations along. Now there's even more, right? Now they're pushing the envelope, so there's more focus on scope 3 and the pressure's going up a little bit. So I agree with you, and it's very hard to do. And coming full circle to getting back to, well, how do infrastructure projects help, or how do energy efficiency projects help? And a lot of the commercial real estate, everybody on the call probably knows lease structures, especially triple nets, have actually disincentivized landlords to do things that help the efficiency of the building because it's all pass through. And when you're looking at when you're looking at a commercial real estate from an NOI perspective, it doesn't matter, right? But now if they're getting pressure to also report their scope 3 and also report what they're doing to help reduce their scope 3 emissions, and I'll give you a perfect example, not a commercial real estate, more of a retail real estate player in New York, central plant that serves all of the strip mall and the anchor stores, are gas-fired, the 40-year-old gas-fired absorption chillers. And they're going to electrify. And where does all that carbon benefit go? A lot of it is scope 3. So doing a central plant project has given them the opportunity to probably kill their largest scope 3 contribution of their entire portfolio in one rifle shot. And I'm just bringing it back to yours, but the way that we know that is we had good metering for the tenants, right? A lot of them were sub-metered. And there was the opportunity, age driven, which I think is going to be where our conversation might go next, is like, well, how do you prioritize these infrastructure projects to really help you? And so that's one example of where doing something like that helps you with your scope 1 and 2. It also helps with scope 3.
Yeah, I that's an awesome example. I asked the audience, what initiatives their firms are currently taking to decarbonize. I mean, let's say we benchmarked our emissions. Maybe it's just 1 and 2. Maybe we've included scope 3. We set science-based targets. I know you're chocked full of examples of what firms are doing to kind of go about achieving these goals. Can you provide us with a few more? I know that's.
Yeah, sure. And I think, and in our conversations, we talked about like everybody's got to look for, the low hanging fruit first, the things you can act on quickly. I'm going to assume that lighting is pretty much taken care of in just about every building. I mean, it can always be better, right? But the fundamental baseload lighting opportunity, I think, has been consumed or executed. We're seeing a lot of our clients waking up to the fact that their control systems are antiquated, and that if they look at their operations and controls, that's a relatively inexpensive way to optimize and I'm sure, everybody's heard this before, but I think it's someplace that deserves a good hard look on optimizing operations through controls. So your example was, hey, Mr. Tenant, looks like you're leaving your lights on all weekend. Well, that's control function. It can be. And then I would put controls and retro commissioning together. I think those are the next wave of low-hanging fruit if they haven't been done. But I've been in a lot of New York City buildings, and I'm still seeing a hodgepodge of pneumatics with maybe the central plant's controlled, but out in the systems it's still pneumatic or vice versa.
Mhm.
So I think that's a really good place to look. And when you have, you can, when you're doing a controls refresh, you can add the peripherals that you need to do measuring and monitoring of tenant systems at the same time. It's just another device.
Mm.
It doesn't have to be a separate overlay system too, which I don't know what your experience is, but mine's always been, if you have a building automation system, put the peripherals in there and connect it to the system and program it, and it will do that work for you if you let it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. The kind of practice that we generally follow is, have the building automation system as like a central repository in terms of a backup, but then have an overlay for usability and better analytics and all that stuff.
and sometimes overlays make
And data
complete sense too.
trending. The BAS is not particularly good at trending that data over. It can't even
Right,
do more than a week or two.
right.
So
Especially if the overlay is as a service too, then it
exactly.
definitely pays. Um, so I think those are, unless there was something else that you had on your mind for the low hanging stuff. But
No,
what
let's get into it. Let's get
yeah,
into the less low hanging.
what I'm seeing is and it's confounded me for a long time in my career, and it's finally, I don't know if anybody else on the call, there was a BOMA energy action meeting last week. And it was the marketplace talking about energy and meeting L97 and the challenges and what they're doing. And it did come up in that I've been involved in so many organizations, and they have ESG plans, they have good sustainability people, they're committed, and then they also have operations and asset managers and capital projects groups.
Mhm.
And they've been very, very siloed. So you might have a commercial real estate organization that spends millions a year on capital projects, some driven out of need for failures, some driven out of a little bit of foresight and saying that this thing is going to die in a couple months or a year or two, and we need to address it. But there hasn't been I haven't seen strong coordination between the asset management group, capital projects, and the sustainability. They're siloed to a certain extent. Um, and what confounds me is that so many of the things that happen on the capital project side can be taken advantage of by meeting sustainability goals. Because 97 in New York, it's driving a little bit more creative thinking. If you've got a system that's going to age out, now everybody's asking the question, what should I be doing?
Mhm.
But in markets where it's not driven, like for instance, even a market where it is driven, there's carbon laws in Boston right now. And there's a commercial real estate organization that's going to replace their rooftop air cooled chillers. And their buildings are large enough to do other options, either central heat pumps or central plant, which is a huge efficiency improvement. And you get rid of, a bunch of hydrocarbons. But I don't think there's no communication or there's no drive. No one in the sustainability department has vision into it to say, hey, hold on, pump the brakes for a second. Maybe we should do something differently.
Mhm.
Um, so, but at the same time, these organizations spend a lot of money on capital projects that I just think a little bit more coordination and would be helpful. I'll close this thread with, I did have a conversation with a friend of mine who's a VP of sustainability for a large national REIT that is fundamentally more retail than commercial real estate. But I said, why, I see this project in your organization that could kill a third of your scope 3,
Wow.
and it's right there. Why isn't it a priority? And she said to me, at the end of the day, all decisions in commercial real estate REITs are still, they're financially based on the financial performance of the portfolio. And I get it. That's why commercial real estate is a business.
Mhm.
Um, and my takeaway from that comment was that So there's when you're doing NOI or calculation, right? It's dollars spent by how it's going to improve the performance of the asset, and that's NOI improvement, right? The delta. There's no variable in there that says it will help me meet my ESG goals,
Mhm.
or it won't. So there's no variable in the calculation for what people do and what they base their capital projects decisions on.
Mhm.
And that's just the way that it is. I'm starting to see a little bit more convergence, but I would really I'll stop there and say, see if I'm, off base or
No,
hearing.
I'm sure that resonates with every organization where um, capital projects are being funded every single day, and separately, sustainability are working on their own retrofit initiatives and initiatives outside of the normal capital planning and budgeting process. I'm sure it happens all the time.
Right.
In terms of the um, the looking at things from purely a financial perspective, you said these worlds are converging, and I think the pressures that we talked about initially are actually tying those things together, where financial incentive equals ESG or whatever you want to, decarbonization incentive. I know Green Street just did a webinar, and they said if you extrapolate kind of current like average municipal carbon efficiency regulations across the country, I think they said it's a 1 to 3% NOI hit, or just the cost of going green is 1 to 3% of NOI. So not insignificant. I mean, it's not it's not going to be everything, but I think if you told an owner that we're going to take a 3% hit on NOI, either through fines or through investments and efficiency, they're going to take it seriously. I think that's a lot of money.
Yeah. Especially in a post-COVID market. I mean, this is a hard conversation to have when you're just coming out of something that just kicked the legs out of your entire,
Right.
you know, um,
And it varies by property type. There are industrial portfolios that have seen rent increase by over 100% since COVID happened. So
right.
yeah, it varies.
The other thing that I wanted to that I've been noticing, well, a couple things on like I was at a panel, like I said, in New York the other last week, and usually when you go to energy action or sustainability, conferences and panels, there's three VPs of sustainability on the panel. Well, this was two VPs of sustainability and a head of engineering for a large, portfolio. So there was the asset side and the capital side at the table. So that's why, and I'm seeing that a little bit more. It's not just the sustainability leads, leadership talking about what organizations are doing, but there was somebody at the table that was, from the transmission and the gearbox, talking about the same things. But another thing that I wanted to talk about, and maybe this is obvious to everybody, but let's say you have 100,000 something of your portfolio, units of energy, and you're meeting your goals by buying 30% of RECs or solar, right? So
Mhm.
renewable energy. If you reduce your portfolio consumption by 10%, your percent of energy provided by renewables goes up without even doing anything on the renewable side, on the
Mhm.
procurement side, right? Because your overall consumption has gone down. Now your renewables as a percent of your whole is bigger.
Hmm.
And that not only works for your organization, but also if you want to keep your renewables contribution at 30%, then you get to give 5% back to the market for somebody else to use. So I don't, it's good to think about for organizations when you do things to your infrastructure, you have direct control over your operations. It actually, to me, supercharges everything else that you're doing on the subject and maybe even gives a little bit more capacity back to the market. A collective kind of activity like that is, can really move the needle quick.
Mhm.
So, um,
This is semi-related. Amanda wrote in I'm dealing with mostly with new construction, affordable / supportive housing, where developers are getting funded from various state and city agencies. And there are numerous incentives for, clean heat programs and NYSERDA rebates and IRA tax credits, et cetera, for implementing sustainability and energy efficiency efforts, or they're required, such as solar where feasible and green roofs. Now seeing more interest in geothermal, but she said not doing a lot on the retrofitting existing buildings, but I can't help thinking that that component will explode in the near future due to local laws. And this is exactly what Steve is saying here. Like I think the stat is 80% of buildings in 2050 have already been built, right? So
Right.
from a municipal and state and national perspective, retrofitting is absolutely essential. There's no getting to where we're trying to go through new development only. Anything to add there, Steve?
Just, if like I said, I've been in this for a long time. EPA Energy Star's mantra has been reduce your load, then put on renewables, and this was just when the conversation was energy efficiency, not carbon. And which gets to my position is like, if you reduce your load, you're really helping things, not only for capacity in the marketplace, but your own operations. And yeah, I've been working at this for over 35 years. From the energy perspective, I thought I would have worked myself out of a job by now, but because of that stat with most of the buildings are built, the predominance of the building environment is existing buildings. And you cannot move the needle with, and that was a lot of people's kind of pushback about, well, is LEED and the USGBC really going to be successful? Because there's, 2 new buildings a year, and there's 200,000, for a portfolio. You might build 2 or 3 new buildings a year, and you have 50 existing ones. So
I want to stand on my other soapbox here for a second. My first soapbox was like, tenant engagement is way more possible and matters a lot more than it's given credit for. My second soapbox is that the on-site operations teams are very eager to be part of the solution here. And they need to be, because there's a concept of performance drift. So even if you do a commissioning exercise, a retro commissioning exercise, and you tune everything up, maybe you install some retrofits. If that property, or I guess actually the status quo is properties degrade in efficiency by 20% on average in the first 2 years after a retro commissioning, because life happens, right? Like some tenant asked for overtime HVAC one night and it's complied with and then never turned back, or the fire alarm goes off and it turns everything on and it throws off all the controls and sequences. So I think we have to be real. Like, personnel running buildings were never trained to run a net zero building or a decarbonized building, and certainly the tools that they use for things like work order management were never designed for decarbonization, and that needs to be corrected, right? They need to be brought into the conversation and empowered by meeting them at their everyday workflows. Like I said, I talk to operators all the time, and they're eager to contribute, but they often don't know how. One really cool thing is that, like, once you've brought their workflows into a place where decarbonization is part of the equation, you can layer in, real-time monitoring and say, hey, we're going to start generating work orders for you before tenants even notice that there's an issue. You don't have to wait for that flood of angry calls, right? We can get ahead of that with real-time monitoring. The nice thing is that in the background, that same data is used to optimize how the building's running, to optimize schedules and set points and sequences and all these things. So soapbox point number 2, don't forget about on-site operations teams, as well as, third-party maintenance vendors. They're going to be, the vendors are going to be even more difficult to engage, but it is possible they want to be alerted of issues so that that they can plan, so that they can be there when they're needed. And it's an overlooked aspect of the decarbonization plan overall, in my opinion.
Well, there's a common thread to what you just said. What I was talking about before is that you can't have operations and sustainability happen in two different
Exactly.
ways. It's really sustainability has always been. It's just taking the existing process of how you run and operate buildings and doing it, considering sustainability at the same time. It's not a separate thing you hang on the outside of the building.
Yes, couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, it's just, and that's the way it's been viewed for a long time. So,
Yeah.
I think we're still in kind of, mental transformation of the people that are in charge of these large organizations and portfolios.
Yeah.
So,
Cool. Well, we are about at time here. I want to quickly kind of wrap up and synthesize today's conversation. So, there's pressure to decarbonize, setting a target using the science-based target framework. You don't necessarily need to go through the SBTI organization, but understanding that framework and setting a goal based off that is a great first step. Second step is capture the data you need. Scope 3 is highly likely going to be a significant part of this equation, whether tenants are sub-metered or the triple net leased. There are ways to capture that data, and in fact, there are added benefits outside of reporting of doing that, working with your tenants directly. Look into renewables and procurement. I think have a bias towards owned assets, deploying your own solar or geothermal or whatever it is ahead of procurement, because of the risks that Steve mentioned in terms of, a whale could come into the rec market any day and shoot the prices through the roof. And then on the operation side of things, break down silos as much as possible. A great place to start is capital planning, right? The world of operations and asset management and the world of sustainability should not be separated. They should be as closely aligned as possible. And at the same time, the worlds of daily on-site operations and maintenance should not be divorced from running an efficient building. These worlds need to be fused together, and obviously technology can be a really helpful part of that. Anything I missed, Steve, in the wrap up?
No, I would just add, which is maybe just a little bit from one of the examples that I used before when I saw I was in an organization that was basically a tenant billing and a energy procurement company.
Mhm.
And we were dealing with a large commercial real estate client. And I was also talking to the asset people. So the reason I saw this opportunity was I was at the intersection of the sustainability, their data management, and the asset people. And that's when I saw that one project. And I said, if you focus on doing this, you can like catch up for 3 years on your goal. But the reason I said that is if you're more on the sustainability side on this call, try and get yourself a seat at the table in the capital planning process, because I've actually seen the capital planning process and asset managers be a little confused on what to do, and a little bit of clarity and direction helps them see, oh, good, then we'll worry about those things later. So But that's the reason I saw it, was because I was lucky enough to be at the intersection of those three tables and those conversations.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
why I saw it, and then I could act. If I wasn't on one or two of them, I would never know.
yeah. It's a great point. I've heard an operations director say, I wouldn't trust, if I were the asset manager, I wouldn't trust anything in that capital plan that I just submitted. You know, there is a lot of room for improvement in general, and
Yep.
adding multiple teams into the mix and making sure that everyone's looking at the same thing can only help.
And I would like to thank you for the opportunity to talk to everybody, and thanks to everybody on the phone that was listening. And I hope it was helpful and entertaining.
Cool. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I'll personally send out a recording of this webinar to your email. If there's anything I can do to help or Steve can do to help, you'll have my email. I can answer the question directly or point you towards Steve. And of course, may the 4th be with you. Thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.